Okay, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Network webinar series together with Keivan Zokaei and Professor Peter Hines today. So Keivan is going to be speaking on culture and the missing link. But before we get to that, I just wanted to explain a bit about the Enterprise Excellence Network and who we are. So we are an arena for senior lean leaders in Europe, founded by Professor Peter Hines. And the network includes benchmarking events at award-winning host sites, which are held over a couple of days with the topics driven by members. If you'd like to find out more about this, you will have my email details in the follow-up email that will be sent, or you can visit our website, theenterpriseexcellencenetwork.com. So during this presentation, it will be around an hour with opportunity at the end for questions. If you do have questions during, though, you are able to ask these in the questions tab, and Peter Hines will deliver these to Keivan, but you can also ask these at the designated time at the end. Okay, so now I'll hand over to Professor Peter Hines, who will just explain a bit more into what we're doing and introduce Keivan as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma, and hello to everyone, whatever time of day it is with you. Very pleased to be running another of our webinars. I'm very pleased this session to introduce Keivan Zokaei. Keivan and I have worked together for, I guess it must be almost 20 years in different ways, something like that. First of all, we worked together at the Lean Enterprise Research Center at Cardiff, mostly researching Lean. And Keivan's specialist area was initially in the supply chain, food and drink, and then very much in the lean and green area. So we worked together on a joint publication book in that area. And more recently, he's joined SA Partners, where we work together also. And he has quite a degree of specialism, certainly in the financial services area. And at Cardiff, he used to run the masters in lean service, and so now a lot in the service area, but he's now going to be taking a chance, like many of us over lockdown, to have done more reading and more thinking. So he's going to share with us his thoughts on some of the sort of psychological aspects behind lean and how we should sort of think in the psychology sort of area as well. So looking forward to your session, Keivan, and I'll let you progress.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone joining us from around the world. So my name is Keivan Zokaei. As Peter said, I used to work for the Lean Enterprise Research Center. I did a doctorate, and Peter Hines was my supervisor. I even managed to successfully get my doctorate with his great supervision, and I have to say that it's been a pleasure working with Peter for the past, nearly 20 years. That is scary when I look back, Peter. And more recently, I have been more and more drawn to the psychology of change, as Peter just mentioned. And I have always been fascinated personally by the by change, by the concept of change, and why people change, or even more importantly, why people don't change. Now, before any further ado, before I progress into the body of the presentation I have prepared for you today, I would like to ask you one simple question, almost a yes/no question. That's even before I introduce myself a little bit more in length. And it's, as I said, a simple yes or no question. Have you in your, and there is a poll that Emma has kindly prepared. So Emma, if we could kindly have that poll also popping up somewhere. I don't know how the system works, so we can have people's responses back. But the idea is, have you ever been in an organization where people have been unhappy, where you have observed people being unable to act on clear process opportunities, there existing a culture of blame, therefore unwillingness to volunteer mistakes, lack of trust, manipulation of people and numbers, lack of direction and confusion, silo mentality, so on and so forth. And when I say, have you ever worked in an organization for a meaningful period of time, let's say for a few months, not just a day, of course, not just a day or week, I mean for a few months, an organization suffering from this. So, the question is self-exploratory, so I allow you to read the poll and answer the question. It doesn't mean you necessarily being unhappy, but generally an organization where you know people are unhappy, and so on and so forth. And by the way, the answers are completely anonymous. We will not identify the individual answering this.
Okay, so we're just waiting for the final couple to vote. Okay, so we have 75% voted yes and 25% voted no.
That's incredible. That is absolutely typical of the number I usually get on that single poll. So I'll explain to you why I asked that question. But let me just briefly tell you about what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the psychology of well-being, which I think is absolutely the missing link in creating a culture of continuous improvement. As I will explain in a bit, and hopefully with a little bit of statistics behind it, is that most organizations are missing the why for change. And they miss the opportunity to focus on their employees and putting the real why at the heart of everything they do. And as Simon Sinek, the famous leadership guru, whom I'm assuming everybody on this call knows, have told us, the why is a personal thing. So it's a very personal reason why we change and why we go on an improvement journey. And many organizations are missing that now. And I am going to argue the real why is about people's well-being and happiness, and that's what is missing from continuous improvement, which is rather peculiar, because if you think about improvement, is self-explanatory. It's about improving processes and people and creating that raison d'être for people to want change. But unfortunately, that is not the case in many cases. Now, Peter kindly introduced me, so I won't bore you with this, but more recently I have been working with financial services organizations, all sorts of financial service organizations, very large and medium size also. And it's very interesting that the numbers that came in showed just around 80%, and that's the number I'm very much used to in answering to this question. So here is a general model of organizations going on an improvement journey. So improvement begins with being in a state of reactive, or I call it squiggly sometimes, and then going from that into the state of being stable, and from there to go into state of excellence. So it goes from reactive to being more proactive and stable, and then only then, once the stability is created, an organization can go towards excellence. Unfortunately, around 80% of organizations only ever stayed in the state of reactivity, with only maybe 20% or so go into the state of proactiveness, and a very small minority, something around well below 1%, ever get into state of excellence. And that is the very reason why we're having this webinar today, to explore that and to understand what's going on. Now, this very nicely ties in with the answers that people gave. You gave just a few minutes ago that something around 80% of you have been in organizations, have been working in organizations that people are unhappy. That tallies up with 80% of organizations staying in the world of reactivity. Now, we'll explore that more today. Just before we carry on, as Peter mentioned, We both worked for a center called the Lean Enterprise Research Center. That was the birthplace of Lean. And Professor Peter Hines was the director of the center, and the other director of the center when I initially joined was Professor Dan Jones. And more recently, we had an anniversary of this Lean Enterprise Research Center, which it doesn't exist anymore. It's been disbanded, but the people who worked there got together and held a conference. 25th anniversary of its establishment. Co-founder was Peter, in fact, with Dan. And Dan, in his talk during the 25th anniversary conference, said something very interesting. He could have reflected back on his time of, creating these brilliant concepts, introducing Lean to the world. He could have reflected back and said, well, what a great journey. Millions of people went on knowing what Lean is and on a journey of continuous improvement. There isn't a large organization anywhere in the world today that doesn't have a Lean department or a continuous improvement department or something like that. But in fact, he did the opposite. In his remarks, he said, well, reflecting on the continuous improvement movement, there has been absolutely wide interest, so a widespread interest, but in fact, Lean did not stick. And in order to explain why it did not stick, he explained that it conflicted with the modern management, or in other words, with command and control thinking. So again, 80% of organizations stayed in the state of reactivity. Only maybe a few became proactive, and very, very few, a handful maybe, ever become like Toyota, which is the favorite case study we all know about. And let's revisit that journey a little bit. You see, we started with tools in the 1980s, and then we understood more about value stream mapping and processes in 1990s. And then we started understanding that there is more to this Lean thing and to the journey of continuous improvement in the 2000s. We understood that it's about systems thinking. That was when at the Lean Enterprise Research Center, we launched a master's degree specifically for the service sector, because none of the manufacturing tools were working in service, absolutely none. And we knew that we had to adopt systems thinking and a very different approach. And but then in 2010s, behaviors became very popular. And we learned that it's more to this journey of continuous improvement. There is more to this than the eye can see. We have to work on people's behaviors, and transformation is about engaging with people. Now, but we all know that none of these are really working the way they should. As I just said, 80% of organizations still stay in the world of reactivity. You just told me that 80% of you have experienced organization where people are unhappy. Now, life's way too short for that. So let's explore it a bit further and look into this. And also, I'm hoping that today we will look at some practical examples of using the science, the new science that's emerging in the domain of psychology. It's called positive psychology, or the science of well-being, to actually instill positive journeys. Now, a little bit of a flashback. I mentioned Simon Sinek, the famous leadership guru. He talks about the golden circle. You have to start with the why. You have to know your why. This is one of the most watched videos on YouTube ever, and one of the most watched TEDx talks. And I'm actually assuming that everybody has listened to that famous 7 or 8 minute video on the why. Now, but if you've forgotten it or you haven't, please by all means watch it. But more interestingly, you might not know this, but Simon Sinek also has a podcast that you can find on the Gamble Academy. He talks about Lean and the movement of Lean, and he interestingly knows quite a bit about it. And he also said that there's 0 companies who have successfully used Lean as a tool for efficiency. Lean is not a reductionist tool, it's about people. And it only works when it is used as a people tool. Now, we will follow that. I want to talk about that why. And my argument is that the reason these Lean journeys are still failing to materialize. These continuous improvement journeys are still lacking to take an organization on a meaningful journey towards excellence, is that we don't really put the why. And in my thesis, the why is people's well-being, people's personal satisfaction, not just the well-being of the organization, not just the health of the organization, but every and each individual. So here is his famous golden circle. Begin with the why. Know why you're going on a journey of improvement. Know why you're in a certain business. Know why you're doing something in life, and then know how, and then go on to what. Of course, unfortunately, 80% of the organizations who go on a transformational journey only stay at the what. They know the tools, they know the techniques, they know absolutely they know what they're doing, and they employ very intelligent people. But only maybe 20% know about how to do it systematically, have a good systematic model for doing it across the whole organization. And very, very few actually know the why. Why are we doing this improvement journey? Now we can link a little bit about what is continuous improvement with that why that I was just talking about. Okay, so we all recognize the word Kaizen, and if we ask ourselves what is Kaizen, in fact, until maybe a couple of years ago, I always thought Kaizen means continuous improvement in work. In fact, that is not true. Jun Nakamura tells us that actually the Japanese have a word for work Kaizen, or work continuous improvement, Kairyu, and that is the word that means improving work, or work continuous improvement. Kaizen is a different process. Kaizen is tapping into our own inner strengths and overcoming our own doubts, and through critical self-reflection, finding the courage to find inspiration, and then so on and so forth. So Kaizen is an inner job, if you like, is an inside job, and this is the story of real continuous improvement, is that we have to recognize that inside job that goes inside of an individual's psyche, and which is the real Kaizen, and that's the root of any work improvement, which is only a manifestation of what's going on inside of a person's psyche. And that's why we have to really know quite a bit about psychology of change if we are going to be successful in our change journey. Okay, so a little bit, let's zoom into this Kaizen, which is an inside job and inside the psychology of a person. What is that? Well, here is change, how it happens. A person's content, and something happens. Well, COVID-19, it could be something significant like COVID-19, or it could be something small. It could be like a change in your daily routine or job. And often our reaction, whether or not we realize it, is denial or self-censorship. And from that, we go into confusion. As soon as we let go, we become confused, and through courage we find inspiration, which is very similar to the process that John Nakamura just on the previous slide described. And this is what the psychologists tell us, how change happens inside of us. So and the psychologists tell us you might not even notice it, that you've been in denial or confusion. It could be just a fleeting moment. Could be so short-lived, or some people can dwell in it for eternity. Someone could be in denial. In fact, some very intelligent people, or seemingly intelligent people, just denied the existence of COVID-19. And we all know those people around us. So this is very important to know and recognize where we are in terms of change. And I'm talking about lean in particular, or continuous improvement in particular. If you are, which I'm assuming a lot of you, for your day job, you're involved with continuous improvement. Have you ever considered where you are on this? And it's not a generic thing, because for each and every task that we are involved in, we can be in a different room in this 4-room apartment of change. Or for your colleagues or the stakeholders of your projects, have you ever considered where they are? And by the way, there is no good or bad. There is something positive for both sides of this equation. One side is contentment, the other side is inspiration. And there are good things to be said about contentment. There's good things to be said about inspiration. But of course, what we want to avoid is to stay too much in denial and confusion, and so on and so forth. Now, to back it up with some statistics, it's fascinating that all the research is pointing out that 75% of people are essentially not ready for change. So broadly speaking, half of that 75% do not get it. The other half are not on board. So they probably get it, but they're not on board yet. They're probably getting ready for change. It is only 25% of people who get the change. And this is based on a lot of good statistics in very many different psychological studies that shows how change prepared people are. And all the coaching. So think about all the time we've spent on teaching the best techniques for coaching. We know about Carter, we know about Grow, we know about Oscar, we know about all of these techniques for coaching. Well, I'm afraid they only apply in 25% of cases. Those are people who are change ready to be coached. What about the 75%? And in fact, if you're dealing with projects, bear in mind that you are dealing with the 75%, probably more than you are with the 25%. 25% are very likely to be already proactive. And yes, of course, it's important to have good coaching techniques for the 25%, but not to the extent that we sometimes ignore the 75%. Now, this is, and dealing with the 75%, as Simon Sinek has shown us, we have to know the why. We have to connect with their own personal why, or create the right why for them. And that's where the why comes in. Now, let's explore that a bit further. And for me, as I also said it at the outset, the why can be about a positive reason for change, or having a good reason, a positive reason for well-being, for change, which is often personal well-being or personal change reasons. Now, it is also possible to have an urgent reason or a negative reason. In fact, some of the most famous models for change management, like John Cotter's model, we all know the 8 steps. If you remember that, it begins with the sense of urgency, which is a rather negative thing. And I always thought, well, it's a little bit sad that we always have to have some extenuating circumstances that began us on our quest for something new. Can't we actually change on a positive note? Now, so the why in continuous improvement, as in fact the best companies such as Toyota show us, is about positively engaging people, and that's the why. And let's remember that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that is the real why, if you like. Now, in my research with Toyota, and I by the way, I don't like to use Toyota too much as an example, because I think they were inspiring in the 70s, 80s, and 90s maybe. But today we've got far more inspiring companies to talk about. I'll talk about one of them in a minute. In fact, much more prosperous than Toyota. But in Toyota, in my research into this world of continuous improvement and change, as I was working with some Toyota executive. And you know, there is no word for lean in Japanese. Of course, Toyota calls it the Toyota way or the Toyota production system. But in fact, there is a word in Japanese that closely resembles lean, and that is monozukuri, which means manufacturing in harmony. And by harmony, they mean yin and yang in harmony with everything. Now, this Toyota executive was explaining to me that, by the way, monozukuri, which literally means making things, is hitozukuri. In other words, he was saying making things is making people. In other words, and it took me some time to understand what he means, but in other words, he was trying to tell me that it's all about creating better people. as we manufacture things. So that's why in a Toyota company, in a Toyota family company, the sensei, the mentor, is utterly uninterested in the problem being solved, although they are always mentoring in the context of problem solving. Instead, they're very interested in developing the mentee, the person. So they're utterly interested in that person rather than the problem. And now what is also very interesting is that we can see a new science in the past 10 years in the world of psychology emerging. And that is called positive psychology, the science of positive psychology. For 70, 80 years, psychology, since Freud, has been concerned with curing neurosis. And of course, that's a very noble cause. But what about 90% of the population that don't have a neurosis or psychosis? And what about enriching lives, if you like? And that's why we only recently we've seen this science emerging that talks about personal well-being. In fact, Toyota has been a big user of that, but not just them. Many FTSE 500 type companies, many of the FTSE 100, S&P 500 type companies have been tapping into the science of positive psychology in the past 10 or 15 years since we've seen it becoming scientific. So it's a bit like self-help of the 1980s and 90s, except now it's not self-help without science, that you used to go to a bookshop and you had all of these books on the shelf about self-help. This is now the scientific version of the same thing, with all the leading scientists, all the leading psychologists putting the name to it. And the premise of it, if I may just take a minute out and talk about what is positive psychology, what are we talking about? The premise of it is that your brain can, of course, serve you. If we are going in the positive direction, the direction of positive change, the mind is serving us. But also, if someone's resisting change, or someone is not able to get out of some bad habits, or they are, in other words, addicted to the status quo, well, in that case, the mind is sabotaging them. The quest for being positively inspired and for positive change, that's called positive psychology. And everybody's success very much depends on their own positive intelligence. In fact, it's proven with science that personal success is a lot more rooted in person's positive quotient rather than their intellectual quotient. So the IQ is a factor, but the PQ, positive quotient, is a much bigger factor. And so what I have included at the end of this presentation is a set of resources that you can refer to, and quite easily, and in fact in 2 minutes, identify your own PQ. Now, sometimes we do that, and I have to warn you, because we get a very low score. In fact, the first time I did it, it happened to be that my score was very low. I think I was a 42 out of 100. Now, what I have to say is, please don't be disheartened if you happen to be one of those people. So what? You know, you can very quickly, with some simple techniques, radically improve your positive quotient, which means your own happiness as well as your readiness for change. Now, so also it's worth mentioning that happiness is an inside game. It very much depends on your own power, as Viktor Frankl, the famous psychologist who ended up in Auschwitz in the concentration camps, and he's one of the founding fathers of this discipline. He found happiness being in concentration camps, and he famously said that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, to be happy or unhappy, and in that response lies our growth and freedom. Now, let me explain how Toyota uses the science of positive psychology, and have been using for a good number of years. We know this for a long time almost. In fact, Peter has written about some of this. So there are various dimensions to happiness. or well-being, if you like. So I don't use the word happiness too much, because happiness is often reduced to cheerfulness. We're talking about much more authentic type of happiness. We're talking about being about person's well-being rather than just cheerfulness. That's when we talk about positive psychology or the science of happy. It's far more than just cheerfulness, of course. Here now. So there are different dimensions to well-being, and one dimension is positive emotions. So things like having good food, sex, things like that. These are positive emotions. That is actually a dimension of happiness or well-being, but there are so many other dimensions that go beyond just simple positive pleasures or positive emotions, if you like. And engagement is another one. So what is engagement? So it's a person who's so happy in whatever they're engaged in. And the actual well-being that comes from that engagement makes them do it. So for example, take people who do really hard things without being paid for it. So a person who climbs tall mountains, goes to Mount Everest or K2 without ever having received any sort of form of compensation for it. But they do it because they get a kick out of it. People who, in the old days when Olympics was actually a non-professional sport, and people who ran marathon and became Olympics medalists, and they were just people who were doing it for the pure pleasure they got out of that engagement, that moment that they were in the flow, in the zone of doing something rather difficult. And imagine if you have that in the work you do. So in the day job you do, and that's good for you. You're very lucky if you're one of those few people who get a kick out of what they do day to day. And that's the bit that Toyota knows about for a long time and have been putting to very powerful use, which is creating that zone of engagement, creating that zone of flow, as we call it, for people to be in a zone where they really enjoy what they do. They're always bettering their own personal record, and they're always being challenged and stretched, and they give them just the right dose of challenge, not too much to break them, not too little to make them frustrated and bored, but just the right dose to give them the engagement and the stretch, if you like. Now, so there are other dimensions to well-being, and I'll go through them very quickly because we're not here to talk about the science of well-being. That's out there. You can go and read about it. So relationships. Okay, I have a 8-month-old boy, and I have to say, well, that's having a child is discovering a whole new dimension to happiness, of course, and relationship with your spouse, your partner, so on and so forth. Meaning, some people get a kick out of structured religion. Some people are just more or less structured about it, and more laissez-faire about the religion they follow or their own personal meaning they follow. And achievement, some people just go and chase the next achievement, so the next degree or the next certification or the next prize, not because there any sort of not necessarily because there is financial remuneration attached to it, but for the sake of that achievement per se. Now, so you can see there are whole dimensions of this, and by knowing these, hopefully we can design our lives, we can design our lives to be tapping into these various dimensions. Now, one company that has been, and that company, luckily for us, is not Toyota, because I am personally sick and tired of all the time using Toyota as that one example everywhere. One company that has been using the science of positive psychology very intelligently to a huge extent is NextJump. Now, this is a relatively small IT company, only $2 billion to $2.5 billion turnover, and they have a simple motto in NextJump. So they say, better me plus better you creates better us. In other words, if you train yourself and improve personally, improve yourself, personal continuous improvement, and actually use that knowledge to help your business and others. Together we create a better world. In fact, they've got a very interesting system internally, to the point that every single employee in NextJump gets 50% of the time back to themselves. So that means that if you're working full-time for NextJump, 5 days a week, and you paid full-time, by the way, you get 2.5 days back to yourself. So you can spend that 2.5 days to do self-improvement, to go on a course. It's likely that NextJump actually supports you if you do so, or you can go and do charity work. You can spend your hours doing something good for the planet. Peter talked about Lean and Green earlier. There are lots of good causes out there. You're all aware of it. Now, by the way, this is not completely laissez-faire. There is a structure. Each person gets a mentor, as well as, so they get a personal mentor, as well as they get a manager. All managers are voted in, so all managers are democratically elected. And not everybody gets to become a manager, of course. As a result of that, you have to learn to work with people and improve others around you. It's an incredible system of rethinking management, if you like. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, surely they're not that profitable as a result of that. Surely they're not very successful as a business if they are, and the most important asset they have is, of course, the people. They're an IT company, the tech company. Of course, they're giving away 50% of the most important assets. Well, let's have a look. Here is, I did a quick comparison in terms of NextJump success. This was year 2017 when I did this, and well, the sort of wealth generation per employee, if we take that as a good benchmark, they are about 14 times more than Toyota in the same year, in year 2017. Now, I thought, well, let's go back and look at some of the other very successful companies. So what was the successful company at the turn of the millennium? Well, let's say Microsoft, and they are about almost exactly 14 times more. And I've adjusted all numbers for inflation, of course. And what if we went all the way back to now automotive sector in its heydays, when it was really making the money in 1925, GM, they happen to be 540 times more wealth generating per capita. And I mean, if you go back all the way to the 19th century, the US coal industry, just for the sake of another example, they're even 750 times more wealth generating. So you can see this trust in your own people and believing that actually by investing in them so they can invest in themselves, becoming better people, happier people, and knowing the genuine why they need to change, this investment pays off, more than pays off. And we just looked at a couple of examples. NextJump, which is probably an extreme example for all of you listening in, it's not quite possible for us to give 50% of time back, but 20% time principle, you're all familiar with that probably from Google and places like that, and even Sainsbury's did that for a good period of time, and lots of other companies with great successes. Now, but also in Toyota, as we just looked at it, they do other techniques. So, for example, this principle of engagement, having people who get maximum satisfaction in their lives, enrich their lives from what they do. So, if you are a great engineer and you have great expertise in design, or you're a great manufacturer on the line, or whatever you're good at, and so on and so forth. Now, so the point that I've made so far, if I summarize, is that Simon Sinek tells us the missing link in terms of journey for improvement is knowing the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing continuous improvement? And then I just argued that in order to know the why, the why needs to be, and the why we know is very personal. And in order to have that why, we have to tap into personal psychology of each individual, understand what brings happiness and well-being to the individual. And also, luckily for us, we know that more recently there is a body of science that is out there to help us. So it's not, we don't need to rely on pseudoscience anymore, and that's very important. And now, why not tap into it? And okay, so we also looked at the dimensions of positive psychology. Now, what is also important to know is that the neuroscientists, they tell us that by And by doing certain exercises, you can actually change the wiring, the neurons in your brain. In other words, you can permanently make yourself happier and more adaptable and more recipient of positive change. Now, by the way, they also tell us those three things are interlinked. So a more adaptable person is happier, and a happier person is more recipient to change, and so on and so forth. Now, so I'm gonna just passingly talk about some important tips that we can use to get acquainted with this body of science that we call positive psychology of the science of well-being. The first one is your own grit. And this is even more important when something like COVID-19 happens, when you're suddenly faced with a radical, chaotic issue like a pandemic. Well, how about measuring your own grit, targeting your next level of being gritty, improving it and repeating that cycle. So, at the end of the presentation that I've put up here, there's loads of free resources. A lot of stuff that I've shared with you are open source, by the way. So you can, unlike some of the psychometric tests and questions that you need to spend a lot of money on it, these are all accessible free of charge. So there is a link that you can go and measure your grit by some of the leading Ivy League university in the world. So why don't you identify that? That is a starting point, actually. How ready are we to stand up to some of the hardship that we face? And actually, you can target, improve it, and repeat that cycle. That is the first tip that I can share with you. But there are also all sorts of other tips that we can share in order to bring about more happiness to the individual. And it's interesting, I have been mixing these with continuous improvement for the past 6 years. And I have to share a personal story with you because I was challenged by senior vice president of HR in a major sort of global tech company. And she said, well, but you know, you are talking about change, transformation, and this culture of improvement, and we love it, and everybody wants to do it. But there is something missing here. And what about connecting it on a personal level for people, bringing it to life for people on a personal level? And I had to, so at the beginning, I don't think I understood the question, but eventually when it dawned on me that she's got a point about making it absolutely relevant to the individual, I had to put my hand up and say, well, I don't have anything. In fact, in my lean repertoire, in the toolbox, I don't think there is anything. So that was when I started looking and researching. And in fact, Dolores, this lady, she's been there on the journey with me all along, and we've been sort of communicating. And so there is a whole domain of positive psychology to open up the world for me. And we also know more recently, Toyota are the 75% I talked about that are not change ready, and Toyota is apparently aware of this. They are using therapy techniques to bring change about for those people, to connect on a personal why level with those people and gradually get them to change in the right direction. So this is just something that is happening in parallel inside the Toyota for the past 6 or 7 years, by the way, because they're acutely aware of the likes of Tesla, and the world is moving on and taking them over, in fact. Now, so going back to the tips, after sharing that personal story, is that, well, you need to create conscious and positive routines, especially I think this is more relevant in a lockdown situation. In the United Kingdom, we can be in a lockdown any day again, and we are all aware of this. We need to create those routines, and we know the importance of routines from Carter, how important it is to have healthy routines, but simple things like healthy eating, physical exercise, but also work routines that will bring about those changes. It's incredible how much they will have an impact on your work performance. Now, I don't mean to go through these one by one, because this is probably not the place for exploring these details, but I will tell you some couple of tricks. First off, there is the rule of 21. Well, we know that if you practice something, and we know this from change management for a long time, and way before positive psychology, there is a rule of 21 days. If you practice something for 21 days, you've created a bit of a habit, and it's far more likely that it will stick with you. Now, so all of these routines that I'm talking about, if you did it for 21 days, you will probably see a meaningful change in your PQ, and you can go and measure it, by the way, from the links that I've shared. Excuse me again. So counting your blessings is one of those. And we know this, it's in religion, of course, for a long time we've known count your blessings. Now we know why. Now let's count 3 positive things that we're grateful every day, or 3 things that went well today. Okay, so just simply things that went well today, or 3 things that I'm grateful in my life. It's after 21 years, 21 days rather than years, you will see that you've meaningfully improved your PQ score. These are all. The other one is gratitude visit. If you have a feeling that you have a parent, a friend, a family, a teacher from the past that you haven't actually properly thanked them for something great they did for you many years ago, maybe go visit them. I mean, sometimes it's difficult with COVID going around, but you have to go visit them. You can't write them an email. Write them a handwritten letter. Read it to them. These are techniques that will meaningfully improve your PQ. By improving your own personal PQ, you are far more recipient to change. And as I said, we've found a one-to-one relationship between those two. Now, and above all, and I used to say at the beginning when I started this, I used to say to my coachees to meditate. But now we know that people don't meditate. So I have changed, I've given up meditating for other techniques that bring about positive intelligence or improve positive intelligence. Again, this is not the forum for, teaching meditation techniques or quasi-meditation techniques. You can read up on it or from the information resources that I've shared. But it's incredible how much organizations today are missing those obvious opportunities for improving people's well-being by allowing them the time to look inside themselves, by allowing them meditation time, by allowing them self-reflection time, which is completely absent. In fact, you look around you in organizations, organizations are full of intelligence, full of opportunities, but maybe not that healthy altogether. And that is exactly what we have to bring about before we can sustain any of these grand plans we have for transformation and change. And just to share with you, in every single organization I've deployed these techniques, at the beginning, of course, you encounter huge resistance because it's so unfamiliar for us. This is not a place, they say, well, this is business. This is not a place for any of these things. But in fact, maybe that's exactly what's missing. And I'm very pleased also to see that more and more things like mindfulness are becoming commonplace. In financial services, where I work, in nearly all the larger organizations I've worked with, they have coaching, mindfulness, yoga, advertised, plastered all over the company, the workplace, because people are becoming increasingly aware of the need for this. And some of the people who are the biggest resistors to your change journey, rest assured, you can actually approach them with these techniques, turn them around, and we've seen this time and again, turn them around. And it's amazing how much you can actually lubricate that change journey by using the right personal messages in all of this. Now, this is all I was going to talk about. And I'm conscious that we're also running out of time. We've got about 12 minutes left with probably a load of questions to answer. And I also appreciate that And this is probably a new area, a new field. I am an engineer, by the way, by background. So let me share you another personal story here. I'm a proper engineer that Peter can tell you. So I'm not the type that would ever think about maybe meditation or any of that, but it's just through necessity that I had to come and discover this. So I will end on that, Peter, if that's all right, and hand over back to yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Keivan. Very interesting and thought-provoking, and I think it takes a little bit of getting your brain around some of these concepts that you've been talking about, and obviously practicing, etc. So what we're going to do now is have the opportunity for some questions. So in your GoToWebinar tab, you'll find that there's a questions section. So if you'd like to post any questions there, I'll read them out, and Keivan will give you a response to that. So I think while you're thinking of questions or sharing your thoughts, etc., perhaps I'll ask Keivan one or two things. So the first one is, I'm familiar with the Monozukuri, and you've written an article on this as well. But tell us more about the Hitozukuri, and what does that mean?
So the literal translation is making people, creating people or improving people, if you like. Obviously, my understanding is that the Japanese like it because it rhymes with monozukuri, of course. And my understanding from this Toyota executive answering my question was that he was emphasizing the fact that the point here is not to so much purely think about the problem solving, the problem in question. So in fact, they might allow the individual to make mistakes, in fact, sometimes, in the spirit that they are growing that person. Now, this is a very advanced level of mentoring someone. This is a very, very advanced level of problem solving, where you allow the space for experimentation, for the person to, in a safe environment, to experiment, to even fail. And in that context, Hitozukuri meant that we're allowing them to experiment, to have the space to safely fail. So we talk about fail safe. What about safe to fail, if you like? So in that context, he was explaining Hitozukuri to me. But generally speaking, I think it's just it's very important to understand that inside of Toyota, when they are coaching people, they're not really coaching for the problem, unlike many other cases where we see actually we're not interested in the person at all. We're just simply interested in that solving that problem, the A3 getting to the real. We're really interested in the result, because actually they are utterly interested in the person.
Good. Okay, thank you. So while people are thinking questions, etc., the second one is around the Kaizen that you talked about, and the Kaizen cycle. It might be worth putting that slide up if you can flip back to it.
Certainly.
Can you tell us a bit more about those 4 steps? And are you sort of suggesting that unless people are content, they're not really going to make those improvement steps? You know,
so this is amazing. Okay, so Jun Nakamura made this point that Kaizen is really an inside job. It's inside our head, inside of our own psyche that we change. The continuous improvement that we see in work is a manifestation of that. So we have to make the leap and the innovation or the step forward in our own head, or accept the change in our own psyche, if you like. Now, but this is almost the same 4 steps that the psychologists tell us that happen in the cycle of change. So this is the famous 4-room apartment of change, if you like, that the famous psychologist Klaus Janssen talks about. Now, he says that there is contentment, and we are content with something. So it could be that, well, I am In fact, I was quite content with my job, Peter, before COVID-19 happened, if I use that as the obvious example of change. So I was traveling. So that included a lot of international traveling. I was traveling on public transport when I was in the UK. I tried to minimize my footprint, not traveling in personal car and so on and so forth, until something changes. And sometimes it could be something as big as COVID-19 that happens to us. It's like a trapdoor that opens underneath us. And we all know that the world is full of variation. In fact, if anybody knows about variation, of course, is the lean people, the lean community, people who are listening in now. So we all know about change in that sense, that change will happen to us, or variation will happen to us. And that first reaction people have, according to the psychologists, is denial. No, nothing has changed. The world will continue as is. Now, when we let go of the status quo, or sometimes we are forced to let go of the status quo, by the sheer force of change happening to us, then of course there is a moment of confusion. And it takes courage to come out of that, to find inspiration. So the state of contentment is a good thing. We are enjoying the status quo. The problem is that when change happens to it, the problem is the denial and the confusion that ensues. And the quicker we can go through this, and of course psychologists have very good techniques for many years to deal with this, the sooner we can find inspiration, which is where we want to be.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So I've got a question coming in from Michael here. So he says, why are many people shy of noting down and talking about improvements they bring to the business? This is the reason why good progress cannot be shared.
It's actually an excellent point. So if in the past, so I might, first of all, thank you, Michael. I have to confess, I don't know about specifically the context of your organization where you've experienced this, but I have experienced this in many cases. It's because of the experiences we've had in the past with sharing. So if I shared and I got told off for it, or if I shared and I was laughed at, even worse, or if I shared and nobody took it serious, and so on and so forth, well, guess what? I am not sharing this anymore. So even if I am going through this change cycle that we're talking about right here, I have to even hide it and hide it away from people. You know, this is actually a big problem we see in many businesses today, that people cannot share all the change that they've brought about because of this perception of change is a bad thing, or actually not being looked at positively rather than being negatively perceived. There is a deep-seated addiction to status quo. You have to remember, Michael, that people who don't want to change, in fact, they have an addiction. Is not pejorative. It's not necessarily. This is the dictionary meaning of the word addiction. Is that we can't change habits. It's a type of addiction, and or in fact, the very meaning of addiction. People are addicted to the status quo. Therefore, they cannot put up with the change that someone else brought about, or maybe you brought about. Therefore, as people, as a result of this, it can be such a powerful addiction around us in our environment that sometimes we have to hide the change from them. But don't worry about it, because eventually that sheer force of change will force people into it.
I have a couple of things to say on that one. That you know, one thought I have is, you know, like Keivan, having worked in many different countries, that this does seem to be a cultural difference between some countries. So if you're in the US, I don't usually find many people too shy about sharing things that they've succeeded in activity. Whereas living and working a lot in Wales and Ireland and places like, you know, with the Celtic fringe of Europe, it's extremely difficult in that environment for people to maybe share. It's not seen to be the right thing to, you know, to be blowing your own trumpet and so forth. So I think, you know, that's one thing to do. But I mean, the other thing to do is, I think as leaders and managers, we actually have to create some of these habits that Keivan was talking about in the neuroscience in this space. And In the last book that I wrote, in the section on leader standard work, we actually have sharing as one of the roles in leader standard work. So you actually create time for sharing activity. So the sharing activity of successes could be within the daily huddle or the weekly huddle, or they could be sharing between team leaders, or they could be sharing right across the organization. So I really agree, this sharing of things that have worked well to create that positive feel is really important and help people to learn from that. So okay, so Michael's back again. So he says, but my people bring a lot of change forward. Are people shy, really shy about bragging of their little ideas?
Is that I think that's following from what you just said.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Do you want? Okay. I think people. You're right. If I say I absolutely agree with you, certain cultures people are absolutely shy of sharing. But yeah, that can be a very cultural thing. And if I may follow on what you said about creating positive habits. Now, never mind why the negative habit exists. By creating good habits, and you've written about this, as you rightly said, Peter, by creating positive habits, you gradually replace those old habits and allow people to be a lot more responsive and recipient of change. This is again the rule of 21. If you can make sure that people did the right habit to lead to standard work for something for a period of time, the rule of 21 days, then that can be the beginning of something bigger happening.
Sure. One more thought. Did you say that there was some further links or information that you had? Is there a final slide that we haven't got to?
Yes, I didn't so much go through it. It is the very last slide here.
Okay.
And you can, so we talked about measuring your own score. We talked about measuring your own PQ score or grit score. We talked about various, identifying so what are your saboteurs or what are your sage powers and so on and so forth. From the links that I've shared here, you can find all of these things that we talked about. It does probably take a couple of hours of exploring around these, but literally identify your PQ score from the link at the bottom is technically 2 or 3 minutes. It's probably the best 2-3 minutes I've spent in a long time.
Okay, good. So we're recording this session, so you'll be able to look at it afterwards. We'll post it through on YouTube as well. So if you want to get those links rather than trying to scribble them down, you could do that. Or maybe, Keivan, you could circulate this slide and we send it to the delegates, at least this one slide, if they want to follow up on the web addresses.
Oh, sorry, Peter. Yes, by all means, I'm more than happy to share all of these, and I will, if you like, I'll send you a copy if you want to pass it on to the colleagues.
Thank
yes,
you. That
Thank
sounds good. So I don't know if we have any more questions. Yes, we have one from Christine. Christine Stewart, you may remember from Cardiff.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, hi,
so
Christine.
So Christine says, I think there's also difficulty with listening to what is being shared.
And that is also is also another important part of it, as we were talking about it earlier. So people might be reluctant to share, and when they share, if there is some sort of difficulty, people don't pay enough attention to it. Well, it could be part of it because of cultural stigma, that if somebody's talking about change, they are blowing their own trumpet or whatever. But also for whatever other reason, if it's not listened to, well, that will be off-putting. That will be creating a situation where people don't want to share anymore. And I don't know what is in here. Christine and Michael might be onto something here about people who don't want to come forward and volunteer. They bring about change, but they have to hide it from others. And then in a other occasion where people do share, nobody wants to listen to it. In any case, I do agree with you that in the United States of America, you do see people actually being a lot more forwardcoming. And that is a good American thing, I have to say.
Yeah, very good. Okay, good. Well, as you say, time is sort of a little bit against us. So I think we'll bring things to a close. So I'd personally like to thank you, Keivan, for the session. Certainly quite a few thought-provoking, and I'd certainly be interested in following up on some of those links as well. So thank you very much for that. And so I think we'll hand over to Emma to just close us down.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Keivan. Just a few things from me. There will be a follow-up email with some feedback questions, which is really useful for us. And you'll also receive in that email the video of the webinar recording, as well as a certificate. So yes, we look forward to hopefully seeing you again. And you can find out more about the future webinars via our website as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.